The minute mass farming is being done, it can't actually continue. It's got to change.
Essentially, agriculture is one of the leading causes for our state of nature going off a cliff.
For decades, our industrial farming practices have been harming the planet. Scientists now believe that soil could hold a key to saving our Earth from climate and ecological catastrophe.
The history of the sustainable agriculture movement, which spans now more than a century, is a wonderful source of knowledge but also inspiration to know how to respond to today's challenges.
One of these early pioneers was the late Lady Eve Balfour. Her studies in agriculture still influence organic farming practices to this day.
She was running 3 farms at once, one of which was purely organic, one which was mixed, and one which was purely arable. Looking at the state of the soil in each farm constantly through the year over a period of years. Nobody had even thought of doing things like that. It was a totally foreign new concept.
At the end of the war, the government were convinced that we had to never be hungry again. They introduced the 1947 Agricultural Act, which subsidised grain and milk and farm products, so farmers had the incentive to produce more food than they did before.
Remarkably, during World War II, the Hawley experiment was allowed to carry on without observing all the restrictions which would have destroyed its experimental nature as an organic farm.
The new Agricultural Act spurred a boom in British farming, with financial incentives and mechanical innovations allowing farmers to produce more yield for less.
The other factor which made that possible was, of course, the introduction of chemical fertiliser, which is manufactured with nitrates, a byproduct of the explosives industry, but then they had a new use. They could be used for making fertiliser. So we had the ideal conditions for the flourishing of chemical agriculture, guaranteed subsidies plus chemical inputs. The rest is history.
It was like a gift, I guess, these chemicals, and no one really knew, a bit like plastic is today. It was, so useful. We thought science is going to help us grow better food. It's all going to be so much easier, it's all going to be amazing, but we didn't realise that it would be poisoning the soil.
When you apply nitrogen fertiliser or pesticides, or both, which is more or less what happens everywhere today, the pesticides are quite literally biocides. They kill the life of the soil, so that's the fungal organisms, the bacterial organisms and the soil invertebrates, the microlife of the soil, which is in a way the stomach of the plants that grow on it. And if you compromise the biology of the soil, then obviously the plants can't ingest the right balance of micronutrients, secondary metabolites, all these subtle substances which are made available to them through this symbiotic relationship of the plant root zone and all that soil biology, which Lady Eve described so beautifully in her book.
She was hugely interested in plants of all descriptions. So I think she'd have spent quite a lot of time in the walled garden looking at what was growing there. I think that must have been a factor in her approach to farming. It was being manured by the dung from Edinburgh, from the horse taxis, and she would have seen how good the growth was. So that would, I think, have influenced her thinking as artificial fertilisers came along.
Today, more people are returning to the old ways of farming, with a focus on supporting nutrient-rich living soil.
everything returns to soil and everything will produce energy for new life. And that's a wonderful thing. Now, manure produces the fertility to be able to grow the plants. And like anything, if you don't eat, you get tired and worn out. The soil is the same.
So in 9 years here, we've experienced nature coming back and thriving on the site. It used to be used as a more productive, traditional farm. Every square inch was managed, and it was absolutely hammered over 60 years. And when we took it on, the soil was fairly degraded. And we've been trying to bring back the organic matter in the soil and the nutrient benefits. What we've seen from doing that is all the insects and all the things growing and living around that soil system just skyrockets. And now we've got flying around birds of prey, kestrels, we've got hedgehogs that have returned to the site. We've got loads of little mammals living in the undergrowth and all the rest of it. So you start to build up. It's not just about that soil fertility, it's the whole ecosystem that's based around it that you need in balance. So although, yes, it's about good food growing and you need good quality soil for good food growing, it's that whole system.
We're now in an era where British farmers are struggling because they can't compete with cheap convenience. This has led to a decline in young people entering agriculture, with the average age of UK farmers being 60.
When I first came down here, I was able to talk to a lot of the old fellas that still owned parcels of these remnant farms. And what they used to say was that, it was all going really good and there was markets and there was a good value for food, but by the 60s, as the supermarkets started to take over, the price for food started to collapse.
Like a bag of carrots for 29p is just like, how is that possible? For it to be made in a nice way, grown in a nice way that is actually ecologically sound.
I have to have volunteers to come and help me work because I can't afford to pay everybody. Otherwise my prices would be considered astronomical.
What we are seeing is that people are starting to come back to source local food.
Because people have done more cooking, more eating, loads of people have got into gardening, and yeah, it's kind of where you wish to spend your money.
So it's about choice, isn't it? The consumer is responsible for it all. We don't have to go to supermarkets, we don't have to go to McDonald's, but people do, and you have to make the choice. And legislation has to help out.
And so I think that we are going to see within the next few years political leaders all over the world incentivising farmers to rebuild soil carbon and introducing the polluter pays principle to agriculture. And if they do, it will create a financial environment where organic farming and regenerative farming can flourish. And this will quite literally change the world of farming and also vastly improve the quality of the food we eat.
We're trying to help change how people consume food, and that will have this knock-on effect of broadly supporting our state of nature, which is in serious decline, and we can start to turn that around.
Everything is connected. We are not separate from nature. We are part of nature. In fact, we are nature. We just fell into a deep slumber and forgot it for about a century, and now we're waking up.